Every historian, every Hollywood studio, every textbook that ever told you about Cleopatra had one thing in common. They all got their information from Rome, the civilization that conquered her, erased her, and then wrote her story. Let that sink in for a second. The most famous woman in ancient history has no autobiography, no diary, no records written in her own hand that survived. Everything we know about Cleopatra was filtered through the people who destroyed her. And Rome had every reason to lie, because the truth about Cleopatra was far more dangerous than any love story. This is the real Cleopatra, not Rome's version, not Hollywood's version, the version they spent 2,000 years trying to bury. Let's start at the beginning, because even Cleopatra's origin is misunderstood. She was not Egyptian by blood. She was Greek, a descendant of Ptolemy, one of Alexander the Great's generals who seized Egypt after Alexander died. Her family had ruled Egypt for nearly 300 years before she was born, and for 300 years they refused to learn the Egyptian language. They held themselves apart. They were Greek rulers sitting on an Egyptian throne until her. Cleopatra was the first and only ruler in her entire dynasty to learn Egyptian. She spoke 9 languages total: Egyptian, Greek, Latin, Aramaic, Ethiopian, and more. She didn't learn those languages because she was curious. She learned them because she understood something no ruler before her had. That power isn't just military. Power is cultural. Power is psychological. Power is making people believe you are one of them. While her ancestors sat in their palace speaking Greek, Cleopatra walked into Egyptian temples, dressed as the goddess Isis, and spoke to her people in their own language. She didn't just rule Egypt, she became Egypt, deliberately, strategically, completely. And Rome watched all of this and was terrified. Now, here is where the Roman propaganda machine kicks into gear, because Rome had a problem. Cleopatra was brilliant. Cleopatra was powerful. Cleopatra was the richest ruler in the known world, and Rome could not allow that story to survive. A brilliant, powerful, wealthy woman who outmaneuvered Rome for decades was too dangerous a precedent. So Rome did what empires do. They rewrote her. They took a scholar, a linguist, a political genius, and a military strategist, and they turned her into a seductress. Every Roman source that survived describes Cleopatra in terms of her sexuality. Her appearance, her effect on men: Plutarch, Cassius Dio, Cicero. The men whose writings form the foundation of everything Western history knows about Cleopatra, all Roman, all writing after her death, all with a political agenda. Cicero personally hated her. He called her arrogant and dismissive. He never mentioned her intelligence once, because acknowledging her intelligence would have undermined everything Rome needed people to believe about why Egypt fell. Rome needed Egypt's conquest to look inevitable, righteous, the natural order of things. A genius woman who fought them to a standstill for 20 years didn't fit that narrative, so they buried her mind and sold her body instead. And it worked. For 2,000 years, it worked. Now let's talk about what Rome didn't want you to know about her actual career, because Cleopatra's political record is extraordinary. She took the throne at 18, immediately forced to marry her 10-year-old brother because Egyptian law required a female ruler to have a male co-regent. The most powerful woman in the ancient world had to share her crown with a child to be considered legitimate. Within 3 years, her brother's advisors had staged a coup and driven her out of her own palace. She didn't flee into exile and accept defeat. She raised an army on her own, without Rome's help, without anyone's help. And then Julius Caesar arrived in Egypt. Rome's textbooks frame what happened next as Cleopatra seducing Caesar to save herself. Here is what actually happened. Cleopatra smuggled herself into a sealed palace past enemy lines to get a private audience with the most powerful man in the world. She didn't seduce him. She pitched him. She laid out a political and military alliance that benefited Rome, secured her throne, and positioned Egypt as Rome's most valuable partner in the ancient world. Caesar was one of the greatest military and political minds in history. He did not invade kingdoms for love. He invaded them for power. Cleopatra gave him something more valuable than romance. She gave him Egypt's grain supply, Egypt's treasury, Egypt's strategic position between Europe, Africa, and Asia. She wasn't Caesar's lover first. She was his most important political ally first. Rome buried that distinction on purpose. After Caesar was assassinated, everything changed. Rome fractured. Civil war erupted. And Cleopatra found herself navigating the most dangerous political landscape in the ancient world with a young son who was Caesar's biological heir. Her son's name was Caesarion, and his existence was the most explosive political fact in the known world. Because if Caesarion was Caesar's legitimate heir, then Octavian, the man who would become Augustus Caesar, had no claim to Rome's legacy whatsoever. Octavian needed Caesarion dead, and he needed Cleopatra neutralized. This is the context Rome never gives you when it tells you the story of Cleopatra and Mark Antony. Their alliance was not primarily a love story. It was the last coalition of the ancient world against Rome's total domination. Antony controlled the Eastern Empire. Cleopatra controlled Egypt's wealth. Together, they were the only force on earth that could challenge Octavian. For over a decade, they held him off, and then they lost. What happened next is where Rome's propaganda reaches its peak, because Octavian needed to control the story of how he won. He could not allow Cleopatra to be seen as a legitimate ruler who fought and lost a war. He needed her to be a cautionary tale, a foreign temptress who corrupted Rome's greatest general and brought about her own destruction through passion and excess. So that is exactly what Roman historians wrote. Antony wasn't a political ally making a calculated military bet. He was a man driven mad by an Eastern seductress. Cleopatra wasn't a sovereign ruler defending her civilization. She was a dangerous foreign woman who corrupted Roman virtue. The framing was deliberate. The language was deliberate. The stories of her excess, her vanity, her manipulation, all deliberate, because Octavian needed Rome to believe the war was moral, not political. And then Cleopatra died, or was murdered, depending on which version of history you trust. The snake story is almost certainly fiction. Augustus had promised her safety, met with her personally, guaranteed her protection. She agreed, and then died anyway. Most historians now believe she was killed on Augustus's orders, and the snake story was constructed afterward, because Augustus needed a parade. He needed to march through Rome in triumph with Egypt's defeat on display. A living Cleopatra in chains was too dangerous, too powerful, too likely to become a martyr. A dead Cleopatra with a romantic suicide story was perfect. It made her look weak, emotional, defeated by her own passion, exactly the narrative Rome needed. Her son Caesarion was hunted down and strangled at 17 years old. Her 3 children with Antony were paraded through Rome in golden chains as war trophies. Her daughter Selene was handed to a foreign king as a political gift. And then Augustus erased her. Her images were not destroyed the way Hatshepsut's were. That would have drawn attention. Instead, Rome simply stopped talking about her, stopped building her monuments, stopped acknowledging her reign. They let her fade. And then they replaced the fading outline with a caricature, a seductress, a temptress, a cautionary tale about the dangers of foreign women and Eastern excess. That caricature is what survived 2,000 years. That caricature is what Shakespeare wrote, what Hollywood filmed, what textbooks taught. But here is what survived underneath it. Her scholarship survived in fragments in Byzantine libraries. Her medical knowledge survived in Arabic translations. Her political strategies survived in the records of the very historians who tried to discredit her. You cannot fully erase a genius, even when you control the story. The truth bleeds through. Cleopatra spoke 9 languages, ruled one of the wealthiest kingdoms in the ancient world, held Rome at bay for 20 years, preserved the knowledge of an entire civilization, and was reduced by her conquerors to a love story. Everything you were taught about Cleopatra came from the people who destroyed her. Ask yourself why they needed her to be remembered that way. If this changed how you see Cleopatra, subscribe for more buried history that never makes it into textbooks.